Given how much of a cash cow Assassin's Creed has been for Ubisoft, it's kind of a shock that they've yet to jump on the remake bandwagon. But rumors have been going around that they intend to change that soon. The brunt of these rumors surround a potential Assassin's Creed 4 remake, but ever since before the release of Mirage a few years ago, I have been hearing murmurs of what is, to me, a much more interesting idea: an AC1 remake. Now, I don't know if it's happening, and I apologize if the title seems clickbaity, but it's hard to condense my thoughts into a single sentence that isn't. I would, for a variety of reasons, love an AC1 remake. I think it's a cool idea and concept. But the reason I want to talk about it is that I see no future in which the version of Ubisoft that we know today has the ability to pull it off. Ubisoft obviously isn't a company that a lot of people have faith in right now, and they haven't done much lately to inspire the hope that they could do one of their older games justice. But on top of that, AC1 itself is just such a weird, unique, and divisive game that it's hard to imagine what a remake of it could even look like.
I assume you've something planned.
First, you must prove to me you remember how to be an assassin.
Now, before we get started, while making this video, I found another video on a channel called The Seal, which goes over a very similar topic, and while I believe we come at it from different perspectives, I didn't want to continue without encouraging you to check their video out since they put theirs out first, and it is linked in the description. Now on to my point. If you boil them down to their base components, there are two general types of remakes I tend to see on the market today. You have what I call the fresh coat of paint remakes, and these are games that are devoted to offering an experience that is faithful to the original, with the primary difference being a visual upgrade. And the second type of remake is what I might call the modernization, where the essence of an older game is rebuilt from the ground up with the tools and gameplay conventions players would expect in the current generation. The problem with Assassin's Creed 1 is I don't see how it could succeed as either of those. Let's take them one by one. What if Assassin's Creed were to be given a fresh coat of paint with its mechanics and story allowed to remain pretty much the same? Plenty of games have done this in the last few years to mixed results. Sometimes it can feel like a company puts out a glorified remaster, but makes it a remake to justify a $70 price tag. In other cases, however, having remakes that preserve the core gameplay with almost no changes is not just accepted, but actively demanded by fans. The recent Metal Gear Solid 3 remake is a good example of this. Metal Gear games are beloved for their weird Kojima-isms, and whether you like them or not, his style is instantly recognizable. To try and emulate that would have been an impossible task, and obviously Kojima isn't hanging around the Konami office much. Smartly then, outside of some quality of life changes, Delta is pretty much the same game as the original MGS3, again, with a fresh coat of paint. And that's honestly the only thing most fans were likely to accept. Then there's the Demon's Souls remake from 2020, and say what you might about the art design, but the game is an undeniable graphical marvel. But it's also a FromSoft game, a company known for games where the number of frames in an attack animation is something that fans actually care about. It stood to look better, but if it didn't feel like Demon's Souls, fans would have rioted. So if it worked for Demon's Souls and MGS, why can't it work for AC1? Well, to me, what ties those two games together is that outside of the graphics, no one really wanted those games to change, and Assassin's Creed 1 does not exist in that boat. I don't think it's blasphemous to say that even ardent fans would admit it was a pretty rough game even at launch. Now, don't get me wrong, at the time there was so much that was awesome and unique about it. The complexity of applying parkour animations like these to an urban open world, some of the smoothest and most grounded animation blending I had seen to that point that still does impress today, and an incredibly creative approach to social stealth. But as much as I enjoy the mechanics here, so much of AC1 feels like a really cool tech demo for ideas that never came together to be consistently fun to play. The parkour is slow, and the game does a really bad job of showing off the coolest aspects of it. Combat is beautiful but mind-numbingly passive and simple for a game of this scale, and even in 2007, when the game came out, the social stealth felt really, really limited. And I don't think Ubisoft will be setting themselves up for positive reception if they don't expand beyond hiding on benches and standing between conveniently outfitted monks. But perhaps the biggest example of missed potential is in the entire gameplay loop itself. I love the idea of going into a city district and setting up your own open investigation to find your target, meeting with contacts and spying on enemies. But in the actual game, this is really just limited to repeating the same, fairly boring activities over and over again. Sit on a bench and eavesdrop, beat up a herald, collect flags, save some monks, rinse and repeat for 10 to 15 hours. And all of this culminates in an assassination mission, but given the simplicity of the stealth mechanics and the level design, most of these are very straightforward and oftentimes quite boring, especially compared to the black boxes of later games that I think showcase these ideas at their best and the potential of this series. I honestly think that pretty much every aspect of AC1 would need to be fully revamped for a remake to really be worth it. Funnily enough, one of the few things I actually think wouldn't need to change at all is the tone and narrative, specifically the dialogue and the writing, which I think are some of the best in the franchise. However, given how quickly Ubisoft changed their minds about giving Altair an American accent, re-recording the whole game is one of the things they're actually most likely to do, so I don't know. There is a lot to love about AC1, but it's one of those games where one of its most tangible components is the massive potential that it had, but just didn't quite reach. To get a second chance at that potential and fail to reach it all over again would be a massive disappointment. This leaves me with the opinion that if AC1 were to get a remake, it wouldn't just need to polish off the rough edges to be worthwhile. It would need a full rework of its core mechanics and mission design. And that brings me to the second type of remake that I want to talk about, to build a modern version of the game from the ground up. Plenty of franchises, from Pokemon to Metroid, have found success in rebuilding one of their older games using the engine and framework of one of the newer ones. Perhaps the most successful recent example of this is the Resident Evil franchise. In the post-RE4 world, survival horror is no longer associated with fixed camera angles and tank controls, and instead with over-the-shoulder gunplay and precise aiming. Whether you're talking about Dead Space or The Evil Within, or even remakes like Silent Hill 2 or Alone in the Dark, it's understood that this is the style of gameplay you're getting if you're playing a survival horror game these days. And so while the jump from RE2 to RE2 Remake is massive, to the point that the games barely resemble one another mechanically, the audience is easily able to accept this as the natural progression of those mechanics, given the precedent within the genre. I would say you could do this with most franchises. If you wanted to remake Uncharted 1, no one's going to be upset if you just paste in the mechanics of Uncharted 4. If you wanted to remake Devil May Cry 1, fans would expect the combat to match the depth of DMC5. When we see a genre innovate, we have the natural desire to see what old games would look like with those improvements. But a key point here is that all of these games had sequels that continued to build on their core mechanics, and Assassin's Creed 1 is kind of unique in that it doesn't have that. It's probably the most drawn-out topic of conversation when it comes to Assassin's Creed, so I won't linger on it too long. But if you follow the franchise, you know that the core mechanics of the first game aren't really prioritized anymore. Parkour hasn't seen any innovation in over a decade, the stories follow a more traditional action-adventure structure, and social stealth doesn't even really exist now, replaced instead by more typical crouch-and-cover stealth. And I'm not trying to make this a new game's bad, old game's good conversation. I've been open about how much I enjoy both Origins and Odyssey, more than many of the games that came before them. But it's fair to say that the key components that made those games good are very different from the components that AC1 prioritized. It seems pretty likely that AC4 is getting a remake, long before AC1 at least, and when you take a deeper look at that game, that makes a lot of sense. It has amazing exploration, a beautifully full open world, a great story, and awesome ship combat. If Ubisoft takes the awful live service aspects out of Skull and Bones, all of the best parts of AC4 are things that still have templates today. A remake of AC4 can afford to not prioritize parkour and social stealth because, in all honesty, those were things the franchise was already moving away from by that point. But AC1's identity revolves entirely around its core mechanics. No matter how many side activities or progression mechanics a remake adds, it can't sacrifice those core mechanics without losing that identity entirely. We've actually already seen what it would look like if the modern gameplay was used as a template for a game like AC1. We'd get a game like Mirage, and while I do respect what Ubisoft Bordeaux was trying to accomplish with that game, I think it showcases that when you strip away the RPG mechanics and the exploration of modern AC, you're left with essentially a worse version of the games that came out 2 decades ago. I know some people don't need total innovation and will be quite content with the social stealth of the Ezio trilogy or the parkour of Unity being pasted verbatim into a remake. There's of course nothing wrong with that opinion, but it's not one that I share. I've been vocal about my belief that AC Unity's parkour is too sloppy to salvage, and even though I believe the Ezio trilogy still has the best parkour in the series and solid social stealth, that is just too old. If the best Ubisoft can do to remake a game from 2007 is take us back to mechanics from 2009, why even do a remake at all? If we get a remake, I believe fans deserve the version of this game that would exist if its core mechanics actually saw continuous innovation over the years, not just a return to 16-year-old gameplay to bank on nostalgia for mechanics that Ubisoft itself decided to give up on. Now, with almost any other franchise, the devs could look to other games within the genre for inspiration for that innovation if it isn't present in the series itself. But the problem with that is that, for reasons entirely unknown to me, no other dev team is trying to emulate the best parts of old AC. There just isn't a niche for parkour-focused games out there, and the only AAA franchise trying anything new with social stealth is Hitman, which, despite having plenty that AC could learn from, is a very different type of game overall. Part of what made AC so enticing was that it was trying to fill a space in the industry that was largely untouched, and I think it still is today. I believe that's why the original concept for the series remains such a fixture for many fans, even if they didn't quite pull it off. There's just nothing like AC1. Now don't get me wrong, Ubisoft made plenty of better AC games than AC1, but no company, Ubisoft or otherwise, ever made a better version of what AC1 was trying to be. As a result, its most ambitious mechanics have no modern equivalent, and pulling from recent games for a modernization just isn't an option here. If Ubisoft wants to modernize AC1, they're going to have to do a lot of that work from scratch, and that's just not something I believe they will do.
Truly, you are not the man I once knew.
My work has taught me many things, revealed secrets to me, but there are still pieces of this puzzle I do not possess.
Maybe that is a cynical thing to say, because of course I would love for Ubisoft to come out and make a new version of AC1 that innovates on the original formula and finally gives us the game they wanted to make in 2007. There is no rule saying that there needs to be an existing template for a remake to exist. Ubisoft is free to do that innovation from the bottom up. But the thing is that a fairly loud portion of the fanbase has been asking for social stealth and parkour to be prioritized again for a long time now. Any game in the last decade could have been the one to return to the original game's investigate and assassinate structure with in-depth social blending and complex parkour. It never had to be an AC1 remake that did that, but as of Shadows, 13 AC games have come out since the first one, and at pretty much every possible opportunity, Ubisoft has made the active decision not to build on a lot of the ideas in AC1. Judging by how little effort AC Shadows put into things like parkour and social stealth, and how few resources Ubisoft was willing to give Mirage, it just seems like we have a decade's worth of evidence to suggest that the company has no real interest in making the kind of game that I'm saying an AC1 remake would really have to be. While it is really common for me to see people online clamoring for remakes of divisive games to give them a second chance, I don't think that's something I ever actually see. When a game gets a remake, it's almost always already seen as excellent, because that's what's going to make the company money. They remake their best games, not really their middling games. I've never seen a remake that acts as a legitimate redo, fixing problems people had with the original. And while that doesn't mean that kind of remake can't exist, because I could imagine Capcom remaking Resident Evil Code Veronica, or 5, or 0, or even 6, it's just hard to imagine Ubisoft being the company to pull that off. We really don't know what a Ubisoft remake would look like right now. Their attempts at remaking classics like Splinter Cell and Prince of Persia have been met with prolonged delays and disappointing reveals, and we're at the point where I'm not even sure they're going to manage to put these games out. But I'd love to be proven wrong. I mean, Assassin's Creed is bizarrely still trapped on older platforms, and I still think it deserves to be experienced by more people. It's just that given the current culture around remakes and the current state of Ubisoft, it's hard to imagine the people in charge doing that justice. But we can dream, and if they do ever announce a remake, I'm certainly willing to see what they intend to do with it before I make any judgments. That is all I have for today. Shorter video, just an idea that came to me that I wanted to talk about. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on an AC1 remake and whether or not it could work. But otherwise, you have a great day, and take care of yourself.
More difficile